And I think we're back, guys. Apologies about that. Technology's great until it doesn't work. Here with Julian, one of our psychologists here at Bloke Psychology. We are just talking about his experience and journey into psychology, and he was just launching into why he likes working in the men's health, men's mental health
Yeah.
space. And I think the last point that I heard, Julian, was when you were talking about that classic sort of throwaway line that's therapists, and I think it was from the movie Freaky Friday. How does that make you feel? So take it away from there.
Yeah. That I don't know, maybe people don't know how they feel sometimes. And I think that's probably one of the really good things about therapy as well, is trying to figure that out. But yeah, I'm always surprised still by how challenging a question that is for a lot of people, sometimes particularly men, that is to answer. There's something really powerful, I think, in identifying and sitting with an emotion. And so often we try and avoid that as well. And I'm pretty big on stopping people from avoiding that. Because I think that's where a lot of the growth comes from. That's where a lot of the improvement can come from.
Why do you think personally, or your professional experience as well, why do you think it is so hard for guys to even identify, let alone articulate how they do feel and what emotion they are experiencing?
I think it comes back to a lot of the socializing and gender roles and gender norms. And I think that's another reason why I'm really interested in working with men as well, because of that reason. I've always found the construct of gender quite interesting and how that plays into society and culture. And I think with men, it is very much like, well, boys will be boys. You can get into fights and run around and wreak havoc. And, that's how you express yourself. It's not the same for women. You're talking the gender binary, where it's probably more acceptable for women to express emotion and cry and talk to people about it, while guys, particularly maybe not my or our generation and the younger generations as much, but definitely I think people born 70s and earlier, probably more so less acceptable to talk about emotions, and that men's role was to provide and to do the practical things and to suck it up, and get on with it. And there is that, and still is in some places, that kind of boys club culture that kind of perpetuates that as well.
Yeah, and for a large degree too. I mean, traditionally, the only emotion that's really acceptable for blokes to express is anger. It's okay to have a sort of punch on at the pub, or whatnot. Or even one thing that's always struck me as odd is it's okay for a bloke to cry if his team loses the grand final, but it's even probably less acceptable to cry sort of when his child is born, or when he's grieving, or it's a bizarre irony, that tradition.
Yeah. No, definitely. And you said something there that I was going to respond to, but I've forgotten already.
That's all right. At least the technology is still working.
Yes.
So for you, I mean, very early on, still, in your professional career as a psych, as you said, with that autonomy and that freedom now of being fully registered and not having to have supervisors tick off all of your work and whatnot. You're also working in aged psychiatry. So tell us a bit about that, because that's quite a unique and niche space as well.
I do get to see a lot of men there as well. And carrying on that thread of people not talking about stuff. I think, yeah, it's the same thing. You get people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s even, where maybe they've never had any challenges before, and then suddenly, they or their partner is experiencing dementia or memory loss or other cognitive decline, or they can't work anymore, or there's been some incident, some event has occurred, and they've just never known how to cope with things because nothing has sort of necessarily gone wrong, or they've never experienced significant challenges in their life. And it's really quite interesting seeing people at that stage of their life. Sort of, I feel like it's almost harder in the sense that there's possibly sometimes more guilt and more shame, because it's like, I'm 80 and I've been fine my whole life, and now I don't know how to cope with what I'm facing, compounded by everything else that can be going on, both in terms of grieving, death, loss, losing mobility, having to be cared for by family or friends or professional services. And then, the unfortunate degenerative processes that a lot of people experience in terms of losing vision, hearing, your memory and other, cognitive functions. So it's quite interesting from that sort of existential lens, which I'm quite interested in. I think my last sort of therapy crush has been on Irvin Yalom, who's the father of existential psychotherapy, and been trying to make my way through his sort of core textbook, but probably one of the easiest books of his that I've read recently was Love's Executioner, where he kind of chronicles 10 different patients that he saw. Most of them were older as well, for psychotherapy, and tells their stories. And they're very, very interesting read. And it's a very easy book for people that don't have, a scientific psychology background. It's very much written for lay people, not much jargon. And it's a very interesting, captivating kind of read.
That book, I've read that book. I've probably read it 2-3 times. I just love it. I absolutely love it. And you make a really good point. I think even people not in our profession could read that and get a lot out of it, but also see how different sort of the therapy process is for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what it's about. And I think, and that's why I'm more interested in sort of learning and understanding existential therapy, because it comes down to some very key and core components. It's not overly complex. And I think it's something that's universal as well. And I think the more people that I meet, the more, everyone's different and everyone has different experiences and thinks differently and feels differently and sees things differently, which is the beauty of it. But the other beauty of it is that I think the more I see that people struggle or have the same challenges as well, there's that kind of, I don't know what you call it, irony kind of there between the two. And I think in terms of the idea that, we experience anxiety, and that manifests in different ways because of, fear of death or fear of ultimate freedom or meaninglessness. It's a pretty powerful thing to consider.
Those clients you're working with at Age Psychiatry, I mean, I imagine that would be a really different sort of work, especially if they are in that sort of twilight of their life to the degree to which they're facing death and mortality and those sort of things. I mean, how hard is that to engage those clients, develop that rapport, and what's the work like? Because I imagine to a large degree it is existential. There's not a lot in the here and now they can necessarily be doing behaviorally.
I think it can be challenging to engage some people, and it's also it's a tertiary mental health service, so there are some people where involvement is more forced or mandatory than for other people who might be more willing to participate. But I think that's where it comes down to just knowing how to be honest and frank with people, but also respectful at the same time as well. And I think one of the benefits I've noticed of working with older people, possibly as compared to young people, is that presenting yourself as a allied health or medical professional from a hospital, from a public mental health service, there's already some level of sort of respect or esteem, I guess, that position sort of grants you. It's very much the, oh, well, you're the doctor and I'll take the doctor's orders kind of mentality. So that kind of works, I think, in our benefit
Yeah,
for us sometimes.
that's a different sort of dynamic to even consider because that older generation does have that mentality, don't they? That you're the professional, you know what's best.
Yeah, and I think I see very young people still, and I've worked with young people for a very long time. And young people, particularly the ones that come to mental health services, I think, and youth services, generally have a really good understanding of mental health and mental illness and challenges that people face and addiction and things like that. And I still check in with people these days, though, being like, "Oh, what kind of education are you getting?" Because it was only 15 years ago that I was at school, and we got a bit of information, but not a whole lot. And it's really nice to see that because on the flip side, I have people in the 70s and 80s who it might be like a first episode of depression or something that's quite serious for them and the family. And it's so much information you have to provide around that, and there really is a real lack of understanding about how people might end up in certain situations because of their mental health. It's really nice to have a balance, I think, to kind of keep myself in check around different experiences and opportunities and possibilities and everything.
So there's obviously the work you do with us at Bloke Psychology. There's the age psychiatry, but I'm mindful that you also have another interest area that you did your thesis on. Do you want to tell
Yeah.
us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that actually reminds me, I need to chase what's happening up. I submitted a paper for publication about 2 months ago. My master's thesis was on looking at sexual diversity in people with borderline personality disorder. And I was really fortunate to partner with Spectrum, the Victorian statewide specialist service for personality disorders. They do fantastic work, and also with the BPD Foundation as well, who are I'm assuming that they're the leading sort of foundation for people with lived experience of BPD in Australia. I don't know if they officially call themselves that, but in my mind they are, and they're fantastic as well. And I got to present at their conference at the end of last year, and I was actually meant to be doing a mental health practitioners network last month, but that got cancelled, and I think there's some talk about that turning into a webinar at the moment.
Another Zoom session.
Yeah, another Zoom
Just
session.
to pause you there, Julian, because I'm mindful there's probably a few people watching it who aren't too familiar with what borderline personality disorder is. Can you give us sort of the basics, the non-clinical definition of what that is and what that can look like?
Yeah. So it comes under in the DSM at least, the personality disorder section, and a personality disorder really just describes a pattern of behavior that isn't particularly helpful or can get someone in distressing situations, cause impairment, dysfunction, whatever clinical terms you'd like to use around it. There's a certain number of symptoms, and you need to meet a certain number of those to meet diagnostic criteria. But basically, it's around, and the way that I conceptualize it for myself is around emotional dysregulation. So experiencing really strong emotions that can change from, hour to hour, and can be quite distressing and hard to manage for the individual. And that can result in, or also be related to, sort of chronic suicidality, feelings of sort of not knowing who you are, not knowing what your identity is. It might impact your interpersonal relationships. So not having long-standing, very healthy relationships, but you might, have a number of romantic partners in quick succession, or long-term but abusive relationships. There's a few other criteria as well, but I think they're kind of the main ones. And I think the nicest way and to talk about it is about a disorder of emotion dysregulation. So a disorder of or challenges in managing your emotions. Really,
I like how you put that,
it's
because
one of those labels that gets thrown around a lot, and there's a lot of negative things associated with it. And that's why it's really hard to talk about it as well, because I'm very conscious of trying to not perpetuating, that stigma.
yeah,
When talking about it.
That's a really nice way to put it. That lack or inability to regulate emotions and feel a range of emotions really intensely. Because if anybody can think about what that would be like, then if that's your life in some way, shape, or form, it's very hard to maintain those interpersonal relationships. At times you might, feel those emotions at a really acute degree and maybe have suicidal thoughts and those sort of things. And overall, I know, whilst I haven't done a lot of work in that space, a lot of those people who experience BPD really do struggle to maintain, daily functioning at times in their lives because of that. So it's a really nice way you put that.
Yeah.
And I think Pat says something here too. Yeah, often a push-pull with other people, re the relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the other people that I was training with was doing their thesis on attachment and BPD, and attachment is a wonderful psychological, biological concept that I think has probably got a lot more research behind it than other things, and it kind of goes back to when kids were taken away from families in the Second World War from London and put in homes to protect them, and then they sort of came back and weren't really that connected to their parents, and we know that that's something that can be and quite often is impacted in people with BPD. As was mentioned in the comments around, there is a large association with trauma, and that doesn't necessarily have to be significant trauma, but it can be, what people talk about as like relational trauma. In terms of some of the therapies that they use to treat BPD, the language is talked about validation and invalidation. And so the idea of being invalidated or told that, you or your experiences or your emotions are not valid or are not real is very harmful to people. And invalidation is a huge thing that people that have a hard time managing their emotions and understanding themselves experience, unfortunately.
So to address the elephant in the room, Julian, obviously we're doing this via Zoom because of the corona crisis. So we'll spend a little bit talking about that. But I mean, how's that impacted you on a personal level?
It's been pretty good, surprisingly. I had a lot of stuff cancelled, and I'm a pretty busy social person. I was meant to be going to Peru next week, and that's obviously not happening.
I forgot about that. Ugh.
No, I'm actually fine with it. Surprisingly, I think, I'm pretty accepting and pretty happy to, go with the flow. It was quite challenging at the start. There was a lot of information, and particularly working in a public health service and for a health service where we had testing centers and stuff. There was a lot of information coming through work, and then sort of having that compounded by everything that was changing every day at the hospital that I'm at. Plus, with the media and social media and memes and just the news and everything that's going on in the world, it became very overwhelming, and sort of had a moment mid-March where I was just kind of like, didn't really know how to make sense of it, and I just sort of went off social media for a week and kind of didn't really, I was still going to work and everything like that, but just needed to take a break from that, and then started controlling, what I was exposed to and how and when. And I think that was really helpful to have that clean break. And I think because I've been quite a busy person and I work a lot and doing a bit of study and have a lot of interests, it's been really nice to kind of put, my hobbies of travel and live music and, theater and going out with friends and stuff like that on hold, and having a lot of time to play video games. What else have I been doing? Reading, playing music, getting to do more yoga, making sure that I'm getting out every day for a walk and going running and stuff like that, which I did before, but it's nice to be able to have time to do it every day.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And
I
I think,
just realized yesterday with Anzac Day that, 25th of April, it's like it's been over a month already, and for me, it doesn't feel like a month. It's gone quite quickly, surprisingly.
well, I think we're in a lucky cohort, aren't we? Because to a large degree, even though our work has changed in terms of how we're doing it and what we need to be mindful of, Monday to Thursday, Monday to Friday, I know for myself is pretty much the same old. It's just that leisure time, I imagine for yourself too, that you have less on, so you get to focus on the basics, which, I'm similar to you. It hasn't been overall too bad.
No, but that's the thing, not everyone is in that privileged position or has a lot of hobbies or the people that have lost their jobs or even just the fact of being able to still actually physically go to work. I think that's been the number one beneficial thing for me, is being able to still go to blokes and see clients face to face and still go to the hospital and have a team of people that I can have lunch with and stuff. I think that if I didn't have that, and if I was staying at home all the time, I would be struggling a lot more than I have been, because it's around that social connectedness, and it's been really interesting from a psychological perspective, but also a sociological perspective as well, just to seeing how everyone's collectively dealing or not dealing with the pandemic. And I think what I'm more interested in is just to see how we recover from this as a society and how we, relate to each other after this. I've noticed it, and a lot of clients that have spoken to me about it as well have noticed that people do seem to be friendlier out and about when we are on our appropriate, allowed, socially distant walks and stuff. People seem to be happy to say hello and smile and stuff than before. Yeah.
Well, it's such a bizarre time. I mean, we were chatting just before, we went live this morning about that, for some people, in that lucky sort of group like us, it's actually probably, largely positive, net positive. But there's so many heartbreaking stories out there too of people losing their job, or, I can safely say, the amount of clients that I've seen who are doing quite well, and then all the restrictions kicked in and they weren't able to stay socially connected. As you said, they weren't able to do a lot of the activities that they used to do. And now they're living alone. And it's really bloody tough for people, not to mention people who are having to spend time with families where there's, verbal or physical abuse or just toxic relationships. I mean, it's really, really rough.
I think so. And I think when it all first started happening, because of the work that we do and because of my background in community services, I think that was one of the first things that I thought of was, it's very easy for the government to make these rules and statements around, when you're allowed to leave and all this stuff. But there are so many people out there that don't have safe homes, don't have safe environments, or don't have the resources that politicians or the people that we see in the media do, and I was and still am quite worried for that and what the impacts are. And I've spoken to some friends that work in hospitals and stuff, and quite the consensus across the board seems to be that we're seeing less people coming through health services at the moment, GP clinics, EDs. And I'm just kind of wondering what is going on. Is it because we're staying at home, people aren't, getting into strife and injuring themselves or becoming unwell, or because of our inability to leave, or because of the fear of going out in public? Are we all staying home and trying to self-manage a lot more? And then does that mean, conditions will be a lot worse when people do seek support or treatment for them in a few months' time?
Yeah. And that, I mean, you mentioned trauma earlier on when we were talking about BPD. I think there's going to be a lot of, trauma that people have to deal with that they're experiencing right now, whether it be that relational or actual direct, abuse that they've received. Because I know a lot of early on, I think there was some stats around the domestic violence, help services had received a huge influx. But I know sort of the face-to-face services, from what I've heard and spoken to some people in the sector, hadn't necessarily seen that, similar to you guys in terms of the present people presenting.
Yeah.
Same with things, like child protection or those sort of things. I think it's scary to think, as you said, what is happening and what are we going to see in a few months, and hear that this has been going on and this is why people weren't presenting or reporting, because there is a lack of visibility and a lack of ability to present.
Yep, exactly. And again, not knowing the statistics, but with something like child protection, I'm assuming that most of the time the reports will come from schools and centres and other professionals and things like that, and maybe extended family members and stuff, not necessarily people from within the home where the abuse or the alleged abuse is occurring as well. Yeah, it's one of those things that I guess, what am I trying to think? The fallout, I guess, is probably going to take a very long time to really understand, to really sort of understand what happened and how did it impact everyone.
Well, and that psychological, I think, well, maybe not scarring, but the psychological impact going forward on, a lot of us throughout that period, how long that's going to take to actually address. Because I've seen some early reports, even in, I think it was China, because to a large degree they've reopened some things.
Mm.
And there was some report, again, it was just some article. I didn't look into the validity of it, but basically saying that now things are reopened and whatnot. It's only now that people are realizing, some people aren't returning to work. Some people aren't mentally well. And I think that's one thing we're going to see a hell of a lot more about once the physical implications of this are under control. Then we have the economic and the mental health implications.
And that's the thing. And I guess that also speaks to how we conceptualize, or how we know when something's not well and you need to seek support or treatment for it. And, doing clinical psychology training, I guess what was always drummed into us is that distress or impairment or dysfunction. And, people can be really distressed, and I think that's happening. But what I've noticed both personally and professionally is that the people that seem to be quite distressed by what's going on are keeping to themselves and disconnecting from what is going on. And then so, you'll only find out about it in 6 months' time, when we can start going back to work, when we can go outside, and when, everything reopens again. And then people don't necessarily assimilate back into, how things used to be, or they can't function as well as they used to. Yeah,
no, I completely agree. I mean, I think I've had this conversation with a few clients lately that they're terrified of when things do return to normal. It's not going to be a flick of a switch, but that when that day comes, that they're expected to return to their normal capacity, and the expectations are, no, it's business as usual. A lot of them are really terrified about how they're going to be able to cope with that.
Yeah, and I can fully empathize with that. I was, saying to a friend the other day, one of my biggest passions is live music. I'm always going to gigs, festivals, concerts. And at the moment, the thought of being, like Laneway Festival, being in like a mosh pit, being in a crowd of people, is really anxiety provoking. And it's really foreign to me, because I've been at hundreds and hundreds of gigs, and now it's, something that used to bring me so much joy. And at the moment, it just feels like the thought of it feels uncomfortable, really uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think Pat says here in the comments, some of her clients have said very similar. People are in survival mode. Exactly right. It's not about thriving at the moment. It's just doing what we have to.
Exactly.
Margaret says, yeah, this is another whole point we could discuss for probably an hour, Margaret. Do we want to actually return to normal, and how healthy was it overall? And that's a really good point, because I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but there's a really good quote going around at the moment about trying to just actually use some of this time to consider what part of our normal life and routine do we actually want to return to. Because I'm sure in some way we can all resonate with that and go, you know what? That thing I was doing that I didn't necessarily like, or I was dragging myself to, maybe I can change that up, because it has forced us to press pause and step back.
I think so. And I think personally, it's a good time to, so to speak, sort of cut the fat and, just go, well, what wasn't serving me before? And there was another comment there about it being a really grounding experience, and I think that really resonated with me. And it is about going, well, what am I doing that works for me at the moment? What do I need to improve? Just like with relationships with yourself, you have a relationship with yourself as well, and we get into patterns in all of our relationships where it's just it's the status quo. It's what you do day in, day out. You get into a groove or a rut. And it does take something big to kind of shake that up and go, well, how do I want to change my relationship with myself? And how do I want to improve or make that better and serve my needs better? And I think this will be a huge time of awakening for a lot of people. But, it hopefully, as a community, it kind of brings us closer in the sense of supporting people. Because I know that there are people out there that are struggling with it, and as I've said before, don't have the resources or are just in survival mode. And particularly through a lot of the musicians and people that I follow on social media and stuff, there has been a really nice sort of message being sent through that it is okay to not do anything and to be struggling at the moment. Because with social media, which is how we're all connecting these days, people put their best foot forward. They show their best life. They show off their new stuff, and there are plenty of people that aren't doing that at the moment, and that's okay as well, and hopefully through this there will be that more sort of acceptance, I guess, of ourselves and the situations that we're in. And people will be more accepting of other people, as well as we're already starting to see people being friendlier in public and stuff like that.
I mean, let's hope that we can try and, I suppose, take some of these positives, like be more friendly and more community driven, and mindful of our neighbors even. Let's try and take this back to that, when we get 6, 12, 18 months down the track, hopefully we can hold on to some of these things. I liked how you put that though, Julian, cut the fat. What's the fat for you? I was curious. What are you cutting?
I think, putting me on the spot here, I think there are definitely some relationships or ideas of relationships, or ideals, things that I was chasing. And I think that, as I said before, I was always very busy and going out and doing a lot, and I quite enjoy that. But I think that I kind of pushed myself too far in that direction. And I always had a pretty stable yoga practice and stuff, but I think being more grounded and internal introspective and spending more time reading and sort of being creative, practicing yoga daily and doing things like that has been really beneficial, and trying to get myself more into a routine like that, I think, and focusing on more myself and not meeting my needs through other people or external situations, I think.
Yeah. So making more time for those basics that really do energize you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Love it. So I think Glenn says, and this is a really interesting point, as an introvert with depression, single, living alone with my dog, and work in an essential service. My life hasn't changed at all, but it's been interesting to watch others' anxiety go through the roof. I just did decide to buy a musical instrument in case we did go into full lockdown, though. Thanks for sharing, Glenn. I think that's a really great example of how some people with existing mental health challenges, maybe this hasn't impacted them too much, but there's others who have either, are more on edge or have, their existing mental health issues have become a lot more severe. So one of the questions we did have, Julian, is quite broad, and I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't hit you up with this beforehand. What would you say, what are you saying to clients if Corona does come up and the lockdowns come up as an issue for them? What's a general thing that you're saying to clients about their self-care and about how they can try and get through this?
It really is the whole what can you control and trying to find things that you can control. I guess going back to some of the existential themes I was talking about earlier, it's that the way that life as we know it or have come to understand it has drastically changed. And, there is no inherent order in life. As a race, human race, we've done a pretty good job of creating one for ourselves to provide us with meaning and structure and organization. And this pandemic has kind of pulled the rug from underneath us, and I think trying to get back to that, finding a control, finding an order, having a routine, a structure, something that makes your day feel normal again, feel usual, average, around having a routine, getting up at the same time, doing whatever you do in the morning, and finding, even like what I was talking about before with, the information that we're projected every day through social media and through news and stuff, controlling your access to that and kind of making a time when you will talk about the pandemic, or a time when you do touch base with people, or a time where you do just sit by yourself and meditate or read a book, or, think about what's going on, or daydream about past holidays you've been on. It's about trying to take some of that control back, I think, and figure out what you can control for yourself, whatever that looks like. I think that's a pretty global, generic answer to the question. But, I like that because it's about finding out what works for you within that framework, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and you did that yourself, didn't you? You said early on you were noticing you were becoming, a bit on edge, a bit anxious, a bit stressed. So you took yourself off social media for a week. And that's a great example of, there's a hell of a lot you couldn't control at the time, but that one thing you could control and you did it. Yeah. And it sounds like it had a really positive impact on you.
I think that's the thing. And I think, talking about what is society going to be like, or what will the new normal be like after this, we have a lot of expectations now that are implicit around how available we're meant to be and how present we're meant to be through phones, internet, email, social media. And I think being a psychologist, one thing we are pretty good at are boundaries. Or at least if we're not good at them, we have a very good understanding of what they are and can talk around them. And I think that's kind of one thing that, I definitely bring up with a lot of people that have work-related stress, is around going, well, don't always be available for work. You need to set a standard of going, well, okay, I check my emails for half an hour in the evening, or I'm available on the phone at these times. But you're not unlimitedly available, because you need to have time for yourself when you're not switched on for work, when you can focus on yourself without interruptions, without someone taking you out of what you're doing or having to worry about what's going on somewhere else. And being able to give yourself permission to have your phone off, or to not check Facebook, or not to reply to text messages. I think it's a really empowering thing, because, I get it. I think most people get it. You get people that will go, where are you? What's happening? Are you okay? Or just, you open up your phone and then there's a whole bunch of messages, and it's just kind of like, I'll reply to you when I feel like I want to.
Yeah. And to a large degree, I mean, a lot of people, especially in corporate and bigger organizations at the moment, are being forced to work at home. And I was having a fascinating chat with a mate yesterday about this, that it really does blur those lines almost, because a lot of people, my mate and, clients I've spoken to, they might be okay at boom, 5 o'clock or 5:30, they're out of there, leave work at work. But now if they're sitting in this study, like I am here, it might be 5 o'clock, but they might, go for a walk, come back. Oh, I'll just jump on the email, or I'll do a bit more on that report. And it's so easy to just justify doing a little bit more. But the problem is mentally, you're still at work then. And so it's
Yeah.
almost blurred the lines, that whole working from home and Zoom culture, which I think is going to be very interesting in the corporate world going forward, how they manage that.
Yeah, and even talking about the Zoom culture, some of the good memes that I have enjoyed around it is, through this whole thing, we'll find out which meetings could really have just been emails.
Yes.
And I think one of the benefits will be, hopefully some things will be offered more online, more freely available to people, like what we're seeing with, the Medicare covering telehealth and stuff like that. And just being able to support people in different ways, or have, grant people access in different ways. I think that's a really positive thing to hopefully come out of this.
And just on the telehealth, I know we were chatting earlier. You haven't done too much since it started in terms of full days of telehealth, but you've had a few clients here and there via video. How have you found that as a practitioner, as a psychologist?
It's been good. Mostly, I think that the sessions have been good. It's hard though for me to kind of go, well, would it have been different if I'd done the session in person, and how different would it have been? I think at the start it was hard to keep some conversations going, and some peers that I've spoken to have kind of said that as well, with some people who might naturally be quieter, or yeah, we all have sessions where the therapist talks a little bit more, or has to work a little bit harder. That might be a bit more challenging through telehealth. I've been fortunate that most of the times that I've done it, I've already had a relationship with someone, and I think it makes it easier when there's already a bit of a connection there.
Yeah.
You're not going in cold. But like anything, it's about being aware of the limitations and being upfront and honest around it. Just setting it up differently, like you would with other sessions. And
I mean, I see for our profession, I think we chatted briefly about this too before we went live today, is that whole telehealth thing being more accepted now in healthcare, in psychology. I mean, I had, I think, 3 or 4 sessions earlier in the week, 2 of which were guys on the other side of Australia who found us and said, you know what, I really want to connect with these guys. We appealed to them. And I know that I won't see them face to face, but to be able to service them and have sessions with them via video, whereas 6 months ago, whilst it was an option, Medicare weren't supporting it, and it wasn't, socially, it wasn't the norm or accepted. It was still this foreign thing. And I know some sessions, I agree, have been a lot harder. I think for the younger generation, like a lot of teenagers who are doing VCE at the moment, I've been doing video sessions because they're time poor. And for them, I almost think that it's a net positive that the session is not very different, because they're sitting online doing Zoom anyway for school. So it's just, they're so comfortable in this environment.
Yeah. And I think, youth services have known that for quite a while, and have been on that for, when I first started working them like 6+ years ago, of going, well, how do we reach young people? And it is through text, social media, phones. That's where they are, most of their time, and things like that. And I think also, part of what we do is around modeling. And if you can reach people and showcase what, healthy use of, internet connection, FaceTiming, that kind of stuff can be as well. I think that's a really positive thing.
Yeah. And as Margaret said there, thank you for sharing, Margaret. Telehealth is awesome. We spent 9 hours a week on average in waiting rooms until COVID-19, and it's reduced consult fees. It's a godsend for the disabled. For half of them, we lost whole days traveling to the city for specialists. And that's something I think in the cities we lose sight of. That it's all well and good for us in suburbia, but there's a lot of Australians in rural or regional areas who don't have access to services like ourselves or medical specialists, that now it's completely opened that up.
Yep.
And yeah, Glenn and Margaret just having a chat there. Good to see you guys getting on. Now, we'll start wrapping up, Julian, because I'm mindful it's your Sunday and we want to, give you some downtime because it is the one day you don't have anything else on. Tell us, though, if I'm mindful there's probably some people watching this live or watching the replay who might be local, thinking about, I could really connect with Julian face to face, or even, somewhere in Australia going, you know what, I would like to book in and see him via telehealth. What sort of clients do you see? What sort of clients do you like working with?
Well, pretty much anyone. I don't think I've really had a client that I don't like working with them.
Wow.
Even thinking about some of the days that I've had recently, see very different people with very different challenges. And I think that's kind of one of the things that I do enjoy, is that diversity, that range of, just difference. And particularly once you get to know people and you can really start to learn to understand them better and start seeing a shift in what's going on for them as well. I think that's a really beautiful thing when, you do get to do more of a sort of longer term sort of therapy with someone. It's a bit hard with the Medicare model when you kind of get your 6 sessions and then you get another 4, and 10 sessions sometimes for some people isn't enough. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I do quite like longer term therapy with people. I work a whole lot of different ways, but I guess probably some of the core things that I'm seeing people for at the moment are addictions, a lot of interpersonal relationships, so challenges with family, with your romantic partners, things like that.
And you also quite like working with kids, don't you?
Yeah, kids are fun. Kids are really fun. Yeah.
What are some of the things, just quickly, that you tend to support the kids or the teens through, or what are they presenting with?
I think it's quite common, a lot of stress and anxiety around school stuff, unfortunately. And sometimes there are some things as well in terms of that are going on in the family that they've experienced, whether that's, within the family or, stuff the family has experienced as a whole, sort of externally, whether that's, grief, loss, challenges, otherwise there. And I quite like working with families as well. And I think that's why I like working with young people, because particularly in private, there's a family attached to them, and there's that opportunity to really make longer lasting change, or more impactful change, I guess, in the sense that, they're at a really good stage of life. Brains are still developing, and the kids that we see at Blokes are usually quite fortunate and have supportive families, or they're well resourced, or they go to pretty decent schools, and there's a lot of growth and opportunity there for them. And it's really nice having a whole family in the room, and like what I was talking about before in terms of relationships, it doesn't take much for people to get a bit resentful of each other, or to just have unhelpful ways of communicating. And when you can sort of start to draw out what are the commonalities and realize that everyone is there because they care about each other, and you can make some small changes, or observations, or point out a few things, and that can really help shift the dynamic and make people feel a lot healthier and more relaxed at home, which is what we're wanting, what is really nice for people. And from an energy kind of thing as well, I really feed off people's energy, and it's kind of nice having kids have a lot of energy usually, and a family brings a lot of energy as well. And so for me, it's quite invigorating having that there and being able to work with that, and just the experiences of people. And that's one of my other favorite things about it as well. So when you got, so many different opinions and views going on, and yeah.
And when you say, Julian, that you like working with all clients, you genuinely do. You see kids, you see blokes of all ages. You've got the age psychiatry experience, so there's older adults, but even in blokes, you're seeing blokes of all ages from all walks of life. Plus, you're studying family therapy and starting to dabble in that space as well. So, I think variety for you really is the thing that sparks you up and energizes you at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think from probably the two things that I've mentioned already, but what it comes down to is liking variety and not wanting to just do one thing. It is nice to keep me on my toes, to keep me always kind of questioning myself and what I know and understand and how I would approach something or conceptualize something. But also that thing that I pointed out before, that we're all different, but I think there's more commonalities between us. And so it is kind of nice thinking from it, that perspective that, you can be 5 or you're 50 or, 85. But I think a lot of the things that we tell ourselves and the narratives we have about our challenges or what's going on for us are quite similar. And I think that's a really nice thing to be very aware of. I guess I'm in a very privileged position to be aware of that.
Yeah. I think that's probably a really good point to end on there, Julian. Just lastly, Pat says you do such interesting work. Love the existential, systematic, and psychodynamic approaches too. Pat is another psychologist out there who works in the East and in the city. So thank you, Pat. Thank you, everybody else, for tuning in. Anybody else who tunes into the replay of this, we apologize for the technical issues earlier on, but we got there in the end. Julian, thank you so much for your time. If anybody out there thinks, you know what, Julian seems like a pretty good dude, I could click with him and develop a bit of a rapport. Maybe he could support me in some way, shape, or form. Head to blokepsychology.com.au. He's available for face-to-face appointments, but also telehealth. Any final words, Julian, before we finish up?
No, this was fun.
Awesome. Thanks, well, we're going to have to do it again. I think I haven't told you yet, but one thing I want to do down the track is I want to get all of us, all the blokes team all at once and have a bit of a round table, maybe Zoom discussion, or who knows, could be in person by then. So thanks, mate. And to everybody out there, have a fantastic Sunday. Take care of yourselves, and we'll speak to you soon.